Kofi Mwansa still remembered how nervous he felt that evening. It was the first time his wife invited him to her parents' house for a big family dinner. The house in Lusaka was large, bright, and smelled of expensive food. Men in suits laughed loudly. Women talked softly, judging with their eyes. Kofi adjusted his shirt and told himself, just be respectful. To smile. At the table, Madame Thandao looked at him the way someone looks at a cracked plate. Halfway through dinner, she lifted her glass and said, "We all know Kofi is our little charity project." The room went quiet for 1 second. Then people laughed. Not a polite laugh. Cruel one. Someone even clapped. Kofi felt heat rush to his face. His chest tightened. He looked at his wife, waiting for her to say something, anything. She didn't. She stared at her plate like it was suddenly very interesting. That silence hurt more than the words. Madame Thandao continued, smiling. "We helped him marry into this family. Without us, where would he be?" More laughter. Kofi's hands curled into fists under the table. He stood up slowly, nodded once and said, "Excuse me." No one stopped him. Outside, the night air was cold. Kofi walked until his legs hurt. By the time he reached their small apartment, his hands were still shaking. He sat on the edge of the bed, replaying every laugh, every look. For a moment he felt small, invisible. Then something inside him settled. That night, Kofi made a quiet decision. He would never beg for respect again. He wouldn't argue. He wouldn't explain himself. He would build in silence. And one day, without shouting or revenge, they would see who he really was. Themba Dubé used to wake up early every morning, even after the accident. His legs still hurt, and some days the pain felt heavier than his body. Before the accident, he worked with machines and earned enough to live with pride. After it, the job was gone. Bills piled up. Silence moved into the house. That Sunday, they visited his wife's family in Gaborone. Themba didn't want to go, but his wife said, "Just come. It's important." He wore his cleanest shirt. His shoes were old, torn at the side, but they were all he had. As he stepped into the house, he felt eyes on him, measuring, judging. They all sat in the living room, talking loudly. Themba went to the hallway to answer a phone call. That's when he heard his name. His mother-in-law's voice was sharp and confident. "Look at him," she said. "Unemployed. Broken. Wearing shoes like that." Someone laughed. "My daughter deserves better," she continued. "This man will never rise. Never." The words hit Themba harder than the accident ever did. He stood still, holding his phone, breathing slowly. Another relative added, "How long will she suffer with him?" His wife didn't speak. Not once. Themba closed his eyes. For a moment he felt ashamed. Not because he was lazy, but because he was trying and no one cared. He quietly walked outside and sat alone, staring at the dusty road. He remembered nights of pain, days of rejection, and the looks people gave him when he asked for work. What none of them knew was that during his recovery, Themba had been learning. While others slept, he studied. While they laughed, he planned. Years ago, before the accident, he had invested his savings into a small piece of land through a trusted friend. Later, he partnered silently in a growing transport business. He never spoke about it, not even to family. He wanted peace, not praise. Inside that house, they thought he was nothing. When it was time to leave, Themba said goodbye politely. His mother-in-law didn't even look at him. In the car, his wife was quiet. Finally, she said, "You heard them, didn't you?" Themba nodded. She waited for anger, for tears, for fight. Instead, he smiled softly and said, "Yes. And it's okay." That night, Themba sat alone and looked at his phone. Messages from business partners. Numbers growing. Plans moving forward. He wasn't rich yet, but he was free. Free from their opinions. Free from begging to be respected. They thought he was broken. They thought he would never rise. What they didn't know was simple. Themba already owned something priceless. Patience, vision, and the power to stay silent while building a future no one could take from him. Kwame Asare learned early that silence can be heavy. In Kumasi, his wife's family never missed a chance to remind him that he didn't belong. At every gathering, his mother-in-law would smile and say, "This is Kwame, the burden we tolerate." People laughed like it was a joke. Kwame only nodded politely. He told himself, let them talk. Years passed like that. Insults slipped into normal conversation. If food was little, it was Kwame's fault. If money was tight, they looked at him first. He never argued, never defended himself. He watched how people spoke when they thought he was weak. He listened more than he talked. Slowly, even his wife changed. She started comparing him to others. "My cousin just bought a car," she would say. "Don't you want more for us?" Her voice wasn't cruel, just tired. That hurt him the most. Kwame loved her, but he could feel her belief in him fading. One afternoon, the family gathered for a small ceremony. As usual, Kwame sat quietly in the corner. Then an elder announced there was a problem. A land document had gone missing. The sale was blocked, and everyone was confused. Voices rose. Accusations flew. The lawyer cleared his throat and said, "Actually, the land is safe. Mr. Kwame Asare secured it years ago." The room went still. All eyes turned to him. His mother-in-law laughed nervously. "Kwame, that's not possible." Kwame stood up slowly. His heart was beating fast, but his voice was calm. "I never spoke because no one asked," he said. "I was busy protecting what mattered." He explained how he had handled the paperwork, paid the fees, and kept everything legal while they mocked him. For the first time, no one interrupted him. His wife stared at him, eyes wide, seeing him differently. His mother-in-law sat down, suddenly quiet. Kwame didn't smile. He didn't insult anyone back. He just finished speaking and sat down again. That day, Kwame learned something important. Silence is powerful, but knowing when to speak is even stronger. And once he finally did, the room, and the way they saw him, was never the same again. The wedding hall in Arusha was full of music, lights, and loud happiness. People were dressed in bright clothes, taking pictures, clapping and laughing. Juma Bakery sat beside his wife, smiling politely. He had borrowed his suit for the day and spent extra time making sure he looked neat. He didn't want to embarrass her. He never wanted to embarrass anyone. When it was time for speeches, his mother-in-law stood up with a microphone. She was known for her sharp jokes, and people leaned forward, ready to laugh. She started talking about family, about blessings. Then her eyes landed on Juma. "And of course," she said, laughing, "we must thank God that our daughter even feeds this man. Otherwise, he would still be eating charity food." For a second there was silence. Then the room exploded with laughter. Her shook. People wiped tears from their eyes. Juma felt his chest tighten. His ears rang. He could feel every eye on him, waiting to see how he would react. He looked at his wife. She laughed too, softly, then stopped when she saw his face. Juma smiled. Polite. Controlled. Inside something cracked. He remembered all the small insults before this day. The comments about his job. The looks at his shoes. The way his opinions were ignored. He had swallowed everything for peace. For love. For dignity. The speech ended. Music started again. People moved on, already forgetting their joke. Juma stayed seated, still smiling. That smile was not weakness. It was a mask. It was a decision. That night, when they returned home, Juma said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't explain his pain. He simply opened his laptop and continued the work he had been quietly doing for months. While everyone laughed at him, he had been building a logistics company with 2 partners who believed in him. No family money, no help, just patience and long nights. Weeks passed, then months. One afternoon, the same family gathered again, this time for a business meeting. A new transport contract was announced. The room fell silent when the company name was mentioned. Juma stood up. "I'm one of the owners," he said gently. His mother-in-law stared at him, confused. "You?" Juma smiled again, the same calm smile. But this time no one laughed. That smile had carried him through humiliation, and now it carried power. The room understood it too late. The day she laughed too hard was the day Juma stopped trying to prove himself. And that quiet smile became the most dangerous thing in the room. When Adekunle Ao moved into his in-laws' house in Ibadan, he was shown straight to the guest room. Not because guests were visiting, but because his mother-in-law said, "A man without property should not sleep in the master space." Adekunle smiled and carried his small bag inside the narrow room. The bed creaked. The window barely opened. Still he said thank you. Every morning, his mother-in-law found a way to remind him who he was in that house. "Remember, nothing here is yours," she would say while arranging the living room. "Even this roof is not yours." Sometimes she laughed, sometimes she didn't. The message was always clear. Adekunle listened quietly and left early for work, even when he didn't have much work to do. Slowly his wife changed too. She stopped defending him. She stopped asking his opinion. When family decisions were made, she sided with her mother. "Maybe she's right," she once said. "You should try harder." Adekunle nodded, but inside something sank. He wasn't lazy. He was building, just not where they could see. Outside that house, Adekunle was using every connection he had. He spent nights learning, planning, meeting people who didn't care about where he slept. He started small, helping businesses move goods, solving problems, earning trust. No announcements, no social media, just progress. Back in the guest room, he stayed respectful. He cleaned up after himself. He avoided arguments. To them, he looked defeated. To him, it was focus. One day, an invitation arrived. A formal meeting with investors and senior partners. His mother-in-law glanced at the envelope and laughed. "Another dream?" she asked. Adekunle smiled and left the house in his simple shirt. At the meeting, he spoke calmly. Numbers, plans, vision. By the end, handshakes filled the room. A seat was offered at the table, not as a helper but as a leader. Weeks later, the family attended a business event together. They didn't know Adekunle would be there. When he walked in and took the main seat, the room went silent. His wife stared at him, shocked. His mother-in-law couldn't speak. Adekunle didn't look proud. He didn't look angry. He just looked free. That night, he returned to the guest room for the last time. The next morning he moved out. Not with arguments, not with revenge, just with quiet success. The guest room had taught him patience. The power seat proved he never owned nothing at all. Peter Chikondi heard the words so many times that they almost lost meaning. "You are a poor mistake," his wife's mother would say without shame. In Blantyre, she told anyone who would listen that her daughter had married below her level. Peter stayed quiet. He had learned that answering back only made things worse. When a richer man began visiting the family, everything changed. He arrived in a nice car, dressed well, and spoke loudly about business and money. Peter watched from a distance as his mother-in-law smiled in a way she never smiled at him. Soon she stopped hiding it. "This is the kind of man my daughter deserves," she said, looking straight at Peter. One evening, the family sat together and made their decision for him. His wife avoided his eyes. Her mother spoke for everyone. "Peter, step aside. Let her have a better future." The words were sharp, but Peter didn't argue. He nodded slowly and said, "If that brings peace, I will go." They were surprised by how easily he agreed. His mother-in-law even laughed. "See, even he knows his place." The family celebrated quietly that night. They thought the problem was solved. Peter packed his things and moved out the next morning. No fight, no tears in public, only a calm goodbye. What none of them knew was that Peter had already prepared for this moment. Years ago, his late uncle had trusted him with something important. Sealed document, a will that no one else had seen. Weeks later, the family gathered again, confident and happy. They were called in by a lawyer, thinking it was about property they expected to gain. Peter arrived quietly and sat at the back. The lawyer opened the document and began to read. The room slowly filled with shock. The will named Peter as the main heir to land, houses, and business interests. Everything had been placed under his name, protected and sealed until that exact time. His mother-in-law's face went pale. The richer man stood up, confused. Peter's wife began to cry softly. Peter finally spoke. "I stayed silent because I didn't need to prove anything," he said calmly. "I only needed truth." There was no celebration this time. No laughter. Just regret. The will she never read became the answer to every insult. Peter didn't return to the marriage. He walked away with dignity, knowing that peace and patience had revealed the truth better than anger ever could. Emmanuel Niyonzima got used to comparisons. In Kigali, every family gathering felt like an exam he was failing. His mother-in-law never missed a chance to remind him. "Look at your cousin," she would say. "Big house, new car, real success." Then she would turn to Emmanuel and add, "Some people only marry to survive." Those words followed him everywhere. She mocked where he came from, how he grew up, even the way he spoke. In front of guests she laughed and said, "My daughter feeds him dreams." People smiled awkwardly. Emmanuel sat quietly, hands folded, eyes lowered. He learned that reacting only gave her more power. Over time he pulled back. He stopped sharing his plans. He stopped arguing. He stopped explaining himself. To them it looked like he was broken. Even his wife started to believe it. "Why don't you try harder like others?" she asked one night. Emmanuel didn't answer. He just nodded. What no one noticed was how carefully he was choosing his silence. Emmanuel had something they couldn't see: discipline. While they talked, he worked. While they judged, he learned. He invested slowly, took risks quietly, and accepted losses without telling anyone. When things didn't work, he let them think he had failed. He let them think she had won. One day, his wife told him she was leaving. "My mother was right," she said. "You are not going anywhere." Emmanuel didn't beg. He didn't argue. He packed his things and left peacefully. His mother-in-law smiled in victory. "I saved my daughter," she told everyone. Months passed. Emmanuel disappeared from their lives. No calls, no updates. To them he was finished. Then an invitation came. A development project in Kigali was being announced. Big names, big money. His ex-wife attended with her family. When the main speaker was introduced, Emmanuel walked onto the stage. The room went silent. He spoke calmly about growth, patience, and timing, about sacrifices that look like losses until they mature. His mother-in-law couldn't look up. His ex-wife's hands shook. Emmanuel didn't smile at them. He didn't explain himself. He had already said enough with his life. He had let her think she won. And in doing so, he won everything that truly mattered. The family brunch in Nairobi was supposed to be simple. Just food, laughter, and small talk. Daniel Otieno sat quietly at the table, listening more than speaking. He had lost his job a few months earlier, and everyone knew it. He could feel the judgment in the room before anyone even said a word. Halfway through the meal, his mother-in-law cleared her throat. "Let us be honest," she said loudly. "A man without direction has no future." Her eyes went straight to Daniel. "Some people talk about dreams, but dreams don't feed a family." The table went quiet. Few relatives nodded. Others looked away. Daniel felt his face burn. He looked at his wife, hoping she would defend him. She didn't. She kept eating, pretending nothing happened. Daniel forced a small smile and stayed silent. When brunch ended, he thanked everyone politely and left. No arguments, no anger, just a heavy heart. That day stayed with him. Not the words, but the way they were said. Like his life was already decided. Months passed. Daniel worked quietly. He met people who didn't care about his past. He took risks, failed, learned, and tried again. While others counted him out, he was building something real. He never spoke about it. He didn't need approval. One morning, his mother-in-law dressed carefully for an important business meeting. A big company was announcing a new partnership. She talked proudly about the CEO, saying he was young, powerful, and very smart. In the meeting room, people chatted excitedly. Then the door opened. Daniel walked in. He was calm, confident, and focused. He took his seat at the head of the table. "Good morning," he said. The room froze. His mother-in-law's smile disappeared. She stared, unable to speak. Daniel began the meeting like any professional. He talked about vision, growth, and opportunity. He didn't look at her once. He didn't need to. By the end, hands were shaking. Deals were signed. As people stood to leave, his mother-in-law finally found her voice. Daniel, she whispered. He nodded politely. That was all. The man with no future had arrived, and the silence in that boardroom said everything words never could. Raphael Mukaville heard the insults so often that they became background noise. In Maputo, his mother-in-law had a sharp tongue and no shame using it. You are not a real man, she would say in front of others. A man provides. Man leads. You do neither. Each word was meant to cut him down. Raphael stayed quiet, not because he agreed, but because he refused to become what she wanted him to be. Angry and small. She never stopped pushing her daughter. Leave him, she whispered loudly enough for Raphael to hear. You married weakness. Slowly her words worked. His wife began pulling away. Conversations became short. Respect disappeared. One evening she told him she was done. There was no shouting, no drama. Raphael nodded, packed his clothes, and left the house they once shared. People said he was finished. A man who lost his marriage must have failed, they thought. Raphael let them believe it. He moved to a small place, worked long hours, and rebuilt himself quietly. He read. He trained. He invested. He learned how to turn pain into discipline. Years passed. One afternoon, Raphael was invited to oversee a large business negotiation project that would decide jobs, contracts, and money. As he walked into the room, he recognized familiar faces. His ex-wife, and behind her, the same woman who once broke him with words. His mother-in-law looked at him and laughed at first. Then she noticed how everyone waited for him to speak, how people listened when he talked, how decisions stopped until he nodded. The power in the room shifted. Raphael spoke calmly, explaining terms and conditions. When his ex-wife's proposal came up, he reviewed it carefully. This doesn't meet our standards, he said professionally. No anger, no revenge, just control. His mother-in-law said nothing. She couldn't. As the meeting ended, Raphael stood up, thanked everyone, and walked out. He didn't look back. She had taught him hate with her cruelty. But Raphael had learned something far greater. He learned power. Sifo Kumalo was used to being laughed at, but that day in Pretoria hurt more than most. He had asked to borrow bus fare just to get to work. His mother-in-law shook her head and laughed loudly. This one is a permanent beggar, she said. People around her smiled, some looked away. Sifo felt small, like he took up too much space just by standing there. After that day, Sifo slowly disappeared. He stopped attending family events. No weddings. No birthdays. When people asked about him, his mother-in-law would say, "He is still struggling somewhere." Sifo didn't correct her. He was busy surviving. Busy working long hours, saving every coin, learning new skills at night when his body was tired but his mind refused to sleep. Years passed quietly. Then news spread that the family house was going to be sold. Everyone gathered again, dressed well, speaking proudly. Sifo arrived late, calm and confident. Some people whispered. Others laughed softly, thinking he had come to ask for help again. The agent placed the papers on the table. Names were read. When it was time to sign, Sifo stepped forward. The room froze. He picked up the pen and signed his name. "I'm the buyer," he said simply. His mother-in-law's hand trembled. She stared at him, unable to speak. The permanent beggar had just bought the house. Sifo didn't smile. He didn't insult anyone back. He had already moved past that version of his life. He walked out quietly, leaving behind silence, shock, and a truth no one could laugh at anymore.